Welcome back. I'm Dr. Cheek and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. And today is another installment of We Need to Talk. And for those who may be new or may not be as familiar with this series, the We Need to Talk series is just me giving advice that I don't typically give in therapy from a psychologist perspective. And I'm going to ask, like I did in my first video, that you take this advice from me, someone who doesn't know you personally, the same way you would take advice from someone else that you would not know personally. And I'll leave that at that. So, what do we need to talk about today? We need to talk about today this concept of this idea that two things can be true. And yes, two things can absolutely be true, but two contradictions or two opposing statements or two opposing ideas cannot be true. And for this, it's helpful for us to know the difference between or and ideas that go along with the concept that two things can be true are typically and statements. And they are two or more ideas or behaviors that don't contradict or don't oppose each other. Now, they may seem contradictory at first, or they may seem at face value to be contradictory statements. However, they're not contradictory statements. They are two or more ideas that can coexist. And this is what's called cognitive consonance. And cognitive consonance is the harmony of ideas. So when we're able to have two or more opposing ideas or behavior, but we're able to maintain them harmoniously because they're not opposing and they're not truly contradicting of one another. But sometimes when we are engaging in this idea of trying to make two or more ideas to be true, we sometimes get into what George Orwell called doublethink. Now, George Orwell coined this term when he wrote his book 1984. He coined the term doublethink. And doublethink is simply us trying to hold on to two opposing or contradictory ideas and holding them both to be true when actuality they can't coexist, or they don't coexist in nature. So for this, let's kind of talk about what does cognitive consonance look like? What does healthy cognitive consonance look like? What does the idea that two things can be true actually looks like? So statements that fall in line with the idea that two things can be true are statements such as, you can feel grief for losing a loved one or ending a relationship that you wanted to end, but you can also feel relief that my loved one is no longer suffering, or relief that you no longer have to engage in the relationship with this particular relationship partner. Now, at face value, these two statements seem to contradict. How can I feel both grief and relief at the same time? But they do not truly contradict one another, and they can coexist. You can be grieving the loss and also feel a sense of relief in certain aspects. Another statement that may go in line with this idea is the idea that I can love my employer, I can love the work I do, and I can still be looking for new opportunities. Also, the idea that I can be happily single and still desire a relationship. The idea that I'm okay in the space that I am in right now as a single person, and also desire in the future a relationship can coexist. Neither one of those ideas negates or cancels out one another. And that last one is, I can be happily married, but also want time to myself. And at face value, that may seem counter to what we intuitively think about when we think about happy marriages. We sometimes assume that happy marriages require that two individuals are together all the time. But for some individuals, happily married can coexist with also getting time to themselves. I'll lean on the side that makes a more healthy relationship. But again, we do not all operate from the same space. So for some people, relationships look different. But I digress. Being able to be in a happy relationship or happy marriage, but also understanding that I need my alone time can coexist. Now, what does doublethink look like, or what does unhealthy cognitive consonance look like? Now, statements that can go along those lines of being unhealthy cognitive consonance or trying to hold two things to be true that are actually counter to one another. And in that moment, you may be telling yourself two half-truths, or one truth and a possible lie, or two lies. It just depends on what you're telling yourself, what the statements are. Now, what that might look like is making statements such as, I am in a healthy relationship and my relationship partner is abusive. Those two things cannot coexist. You cannot have a healthy relationship and also be in a relationship that has some level of abuse. You're either in a healthy relationship or you're in an abusive relationship. Those two things cannot coexist. Also, another statement could sound like, I am financially self-sufficient and my only source of income is everyone else but me. Again, those are two statements that can't be an and, that's an or. So either you are financially self-sufficient, which means your primary source of income is yourself, or you're financially dependent and your source of income comes from someone else outside of you. Those two statements cannot coexist and one negates the other. Now, lastly, one that may be a little bit touchy is this idea that reality is subjective. But in actuality, reality as defined is an actual fact. is a fact of what's happening in your external and internal environment. That's the reality. That's facts, and facts are devoid of opinion, perceptions, or feelings or emotions. However, subjective means that I am taking my own perception, my own personal opinions, my own emotions to determine what this reality looks like. So we can have a subjective reality, but that subjective reality may not be the true reality of a situation. Subjective and reality are counter to one another because subjective relies on our own personal experience and our own emotions, while reality is simply a fact that does not rely on perception or opinions or emotions. So you may ask yourself, why is this a problem? Why can't I hold two things that are counter to one another to be true? Well, it's problematic because when we try to hold on to two opposing statements that cannot coexist, we may start to get in a place where we compartmentalize, and we compartmentalize the ideas into certain areas of our lives. And we may start to solely focus on the ideas that align with where we are in the moment, although that opposing idea is probably more the reality of the situation than the idea that you're wanting to focus on. So when we try to hold on to two opposing thoughts, they can start us to either covertly or overtly lie to ourselves or be deceptive towards ourselves by telling ourselves that this primary truth or this idea that I'm holding on to, although in the back of my mind in this other compartment that I'm not going to focus on right now, there is an opposing idea that goes against everything I'm telling myself right now. I choose to hold on to this idea, and this idea that I'm choosing to hold on to is not the reality or true about the situation I'm in, but because I am holding on to two opposing ideas and I'm not allowing the two to get to a place where I understand that I either can mesh them in a way that it makes space for the contradictions, or I can negate one or the other. So if I don't make space for these opposing ideas to exist in a way that it's plausible, then I'm looking at how do I feel comfortable with this idea or this situation I'm in when the idea that's compartmentalized is saying that this is not healthy for me, this is not true for me. But at the same time, I have this other idea that goes along with what I'm doing right now and goes along with what I'm feeling. So let me pull that one to the forefront. So that's what happens when we have those opposing ideas. We, in that moment, create our own possible reality, or those two ideas can lead to us being self-deceptive to ourselves and not actually understanding the reality or the truth about a situation because we're holding two opposing ideas at the same time and trying to make both of those true. And those two ideas cannot coexist. So the reason why we need to talk about this is because sometimes we use this idea of two things can be true, and sometimes we use it rather haphazardly, and we use it to sometimes identify two contradictory things that cannot be true and cannot coexist. The reason why we want to focus on the idea that haphazardly using two things can be true is we don't want to get to a space where we are trying to make two things that are opposing exist in reality when it can't coexist, because that might lead to us engaging in that cognitive dissonance that I talked about. So holding on to beliefs that are rigid, that go against all fact and logic sometimes, but we hold on to them because they feel more comfortable. It's what we're used to. And we want to get out of that space. We want to get to a space where we're able to have some level of cognitive flexibility and then some cognitive consonance where we can create harmony in the ideas that we're having. And we want the cognitive consonance to be healthy as opposed to unhealthy. And healthy cognitive consonance is two or more opposing ideas or behaviors that align with one another and can coexist that may seem contradictory, but they truly aren't. While unhealthy cognitive consonance is when we hold on to two or more opposing ideas or behaviors that are truly contradictory of one another and they cannot naturally coexist, but we hold on to both of them and make them true, which makes our reality and how we see the world a little bit skewed and actually based on what thought we want to bring to the forefront of what thought we want to align with what's happening for us in any given moment. Now, go back to my original statements. Two things can definitely be true, but those two things need to align with one another and need to be able to coexist with one another, and they cannot be opposing and contradictory to one another. One cannot negate the other. One cannot cancel out the other. They need to be harmoniously in both of their states. They are two statements that on their own and together are both true. Hopefully that makes sense. As always, I hope you take something from this video today that was helpful and informative. Jot down any thoughts, questions, or comments you have below. I thank you for taking the time to listen, and I'll be seeing you again very soon. Thank you.